There are seasons we don't remember exactly when they began. Only that, at some point, everything grew quieter. Voices softened, light tilted, and sorrow settled deeper than ever. What stayed is a story of those seasons. It doesn't dwell on what was lost, but on what remained. An old silk scarf, a well-worn radio, a friend who kept knocking, even when no one asked them to. In these pages, you might find pieces of yourself. In the moments when you didn't know whether to cry or to write, when you realized that some days, nothing can be fixed, only held. And if you've ever loved something so deeply it never quite had a name, then maybe this story is meant for you. So now, let's begin.
Chapter 1. Summer, 1971. The summer my brother went to war, the air in our town turned still, like it was holding its breath. Not that anyone said it out loud. People mostly talked about the weather, gas prices, and whether the high school football team had a shot that year. But underneath all that, something felt off. Like the silence between two notes that don't quite belong together. I was 13, and my world back then stretched no farther than the corners of our block in Maple Ridge, Ohio. Our street was lined with short, square houses with crabgrass lawns and rotary clotheslines. We had one stoplight in the whole town. Lisa said it turned red more out of habit than traffic. That summer, I spent most of my days on the front steps of our house, sweating through a t-shirt and listening to the cicadas argue in the trees. My mom was usually in the kitchen, rinsing rice or ironing shirts in silence. My dad was at the plant, or the bar, or in the garage pretending to fix the lawnmower. I didn't ask. Michael's first letter came in June. The envelope was creased and smudged, like it had sweated its way across the ocean. He'd written in that tight, all-caps handwriting of his, probably crouched on a cot somewhere in the jungle. He didn't say much, just that it was hot, the food was terrible, and he missed Mom's spring rolls. He added a note for me at the bottom. Take care of the old man, little bro, and tell Lisa she still owes me a rematch in Monopoly. I read that part out loud to her on the porch. She laughed and said, Tell him I'm practicing. He's going down. Then she stole the last fudgesicle from our freezer and biked off like she'd won a medal. Michael had joined the Army straight out of high school, not because he loved the idea, but because Dad thought it'd make a man out of him. This country gave us a shot, Dad had said, like he always did. Time to give something back. Michael didn't argue. He never did. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with his letter in my lap and watched the sun melt into the asphalt. The neighbors across the street were having one of their cookouts. Mr. Jenkins was already 2 beers in, singing something from the 40s about Chattanooga. Somewhere behind their house, a dog barked without much conviction. Our house was quiet. Mom didn't believe in fans because she thought they made you sick, and we didn't have air conditioning, so the heat just hovered, thick as soup. You could hear everything. The creak of floorboards, the pop of the fridge, the distant hum of life moving on. I looked out at the street, at the fading paint on our mailbox, and I remember thinking, though I wouldn't have had the words for it yet, that things were starting to disappear, little by little. Not in a loud way. More like how a song fades when you're walking away from it. You still hear it, but it's quieter, farther. That was the summer I started writing things down. Nothing fancy, just scraps of memory, overheard phrases, what people wore, the way light came through the window in the late afternoon. I kept it all in a notebook I hid under the bed. I didn't know why I started, only that something told me, remember this. Chapter 2. The First Radio. The radio arrived in a small, dented box with Michael's handwriting scrawled across the top in thick black marker. To Danny, don't lose it. Inside was a silver transistor radio, no bigger than a paperback, with a black wrist strap and a long, stubborn antenna that didn't like to stay up. It came with a short note, folded in quarters, the corners smudged. For when the house is too quiet, Michael. It wasn't much to look at. The volume knob was stiff, and the little screen that showed the station numbers had a crack through it. but when I turned it on and twisted the dial, it made a sound like the world clearing its throat. Static. Then a voice. Then music. The first song I ever heard on it was something by the Supremes. I don't remember which one, but I remember Mom humming along from the kitchen, half under her breath like it surprised even her. That was the first time I realized my mother knew any English lyrics at all. From then on, the radio sat with me like a quiet companion, on the porch steps, in my room at night, under the covers when I couldn't sleep. I kept the volume low, just loud enough to remind me the world hadn't disappeared completely. Sometimes Lisa would come over and we'd lie on the front lawn, the radio between us, picking out our favorite voices, Marvin Gaye, Carole King, Al Green. She always rolled her eyes when country music came on. "Why is every guy with a guitar so sad?" she said once. "Did all their dogs die at the same time or something?" I laughed so hard I dropped a popsicle on my shirt. That summer, the radio was more than just a radio. It was how I learned that the world was bigger than our small town, louder than our quiet kitchen. It was how I found out the president was in trouble, that there were protests in the streets somewhere, that people in other places were yelling about things I didn't understand, but felt important anyway. My father didn't like the radio. He said the news was all noise and the music was garbage. Back in my day, songs had melody, he'd mutter, usually with a beer in one hand and a socket wrench in the other. I tried not to play it when he was around. Michael had once told me Dad was a good man, just built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. Sometimes, I'd lie in bed late at night with the radio under my pillow, the sound barely a whisper. Some voices felt like company. Others felt like ghosts, echoes of people I'd never meet, living lives I couldn't picture, all of them drifting in and out of the static like they were trying to reach me. One night, I found a station playing only old jazz, stuff from way before my time. I didn't understand it, but I liked the way it felt. Worn down and a little sad, like an old suit that still fit. That became my secret station. I never told Lisa about it. It felt like something that belonged to me alone. Looking back, I think Michael sent the radio because he knew what was coming. Not just the war, but the silence that follows when someone leaves and doesn't come back. The kind of quiet that settles into walls, into plates left untouched, into voices that stop mid-sentence. The radio couldn't fix any of that, but it filled in the cracks. It gave the silence something to lean against. And years later, when the house was gone, and most of the people in it too, I'd still have that old thing in a box somewhere, batteries long dead, antenna bent like a broken limb. But if I held it close, I swear I could still hear something. Chapter 3. Afternoons with Lisa. There wasn't much to do in Maple Ridge, which meant Lisa and I got real good at wasting time. Most afternoons that summer, we'd ride our bikes in slow loops around the neighborhood. She had a rusty red Schwinn with one pedal that squeaked and a basket up front for snacks or cassette tapes. Mine was a hand-me-down from Michael, the handlebars scuffed from when he crashed it trying to race the school bus. We didn't talk about big things, at least not right away. We talked about whose yard had the best cherry tree, which neighbor might secretly be rich, and whether Miss Palmer, our English teacher, was really dating the librarian like someone's cousin said. We talked while we pedaled, and sometimes we didn't talk at all. Sometimes, we just let the heat settle in and the wind whistle past our ears like the world was holding its breath again. Lisa had a way of asking questions out of nowhere. "Do you think people ever get exactly what they want?" she asked once, coasting beside me past the gas station. "I don't know," I said. "I think most people just learn to want different things." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Then she unwrapped a piece of bubble gum and handed me one without looking. That was her way, sharp one minute, sweet the next. We'd usually end up at the empty lot behind the bowling alley, where the grass grew in uneven patches and bottle caps hid like beetles in the dirt. That's where we found the old couch. It was sun-bleached and sagging in the middle, but it felt like ours. We claimed it like explorers claim lost islands, dragged it a few feet into the shade of the maple trees, and made it our place. From there, we watched the cars go by on Main Street and made up stories about the people inside. That lady in the blue Ford? Definitely running away from her wedding, Lisa said. Why? I asked. Did you see her hair? Way too fancy for a gas station stop. Sometimes our stories got wild. Once we were convinced a man in a tan truck was an undercover spy. Lisa swore he tapped his steering wheel in Morse code. We spent an hour trying to decode it until we both admitted we didn't know Morse code. There was something about being 13 and in the middle of nowhere that made imagination a kind of necessity. Like air, like shade. Mr. Jenkins, our neighbor 2 doors down, would sometimes wander into the lot while we were there. He wore a fishing hat, whether he was fishing or not, and always carried a thermos he claimed held iced tea, but definitely didn't. Got room on that throne for an old vet? He'd ask, motioning to the couch. We always made room. He'd sit for a while and tell stories from the war, never the one Michael was in, always his war. Europe. The good one, he called it. The one with heroes and marching bands and ticker tape. Lisa would listen with polite skepticism, nodding here and there but throwing me looks that said, "This guy's full of it." Still, we liked having him around. He gave the summer some weight, some texture, and he never asked us why we weren't doing something useful with our time, which made him rare among adults. One afternoon, Mr. Jenkins brought us a stack of old records. Thought maybe the young folk should hear how music used to sound, he said. We didn't have a record player, but we pretended to listen anyway, letting the sleeves sit in our laps like ancient scrolls. Lisa pointed to a cover with a trumpet player in a tuxedo and said, "Bet he cried after every solo." "Only the good ones do," Mr. Jenkins said. That made us laugh, but later I thought maybe he was right. By the time the sky turned orange and the bugs came out, Lisa and I would hop back on our bikes and head home. She'd peel off first, waving over her shoulder without stopping. When I got back to our house, Mom would be in the kitchen again, moving quietly, like the day had worn thin and she was afraid of tearing it. Dad would still be out, or back, and silent. Either way, the house would be dim and waiting. So I'd go to my room, lie on the bed, and turn on the radio, low, barely there. That's how the days passed. One long afternoon folded into the next, full of things that didn't seem important at the time, but they were. I know that now. Chapter 4: Cracks in the Silence. The thing about silence is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, like cracks in paint. It starts with shorter conversations, dinners where the clatter of silverware grows louder than words, a closed door, a shrug instead of a sentence. That's how it was at our house anyway. Mom had always been quiet, but now she was quiet with edges, like her silence was something sharp, just waiting to cut. She moved around the kitchen as if every dish had wronged her. She folded laundry like it owed her an apology. Dad, for his part, wasn't angry. He was somewhere beyond that. His words came slow, heavy, like each one had to crawl through him. He drank more, but not enough for anyone to say it out loud. Just enough that we noticed. The letter from Michael that summer was shorter than usual. It had 3 sentences. Still hot, still alive, still hate the food. I read it twice. Lisa read it once and said, "Maybe he's tired." We didn't talk more about it. Just sat on the porch and let the heat press into our backs. Somewhere, a lawnmower sputtered to life, then gave up. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too still, the walls too close. I turned on the radio and caught the end of a sermon about forgiveness. The preacher's voice cracked a little, like he was forgiving someone he wasn't ready to forgive. I turned the dial again and landed on a late-night talk show. A man was talking about the moon landing like it had just happened yesterday. "We watched the impossible happen," he said, "and now we're bored again." I didn't know why, but that made me sad. The next morning I found Mom standing in the backyard, barefoot, staring at the tomato plants she'd forgotten to water. She didn't say anything. She just turned and went back inside. At school, Miss Palmer asked us to write about a memory that didn't belong to us. "Borrow something from someone else's life," she said. I wrote about my mother's scarf, the one she kept folded in the drawer she never opened unless she was sad. I didn't know where it came from, but I knew it smelled like rain and something older than sadness. Miss Palmer read my piece and underlined a line in red. Something older than sadness. She wrote, "Hold on to that." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then. But I kept writing anyway. Chapter 5. The Letter That Never Comes. By late August, the mailbox had turned into something we all pretended not to watch. Every morning I'd hear the soft metallic clang of the mail slot, and I'd wait a beat. Not because I was eager, but because I didn't want to be. Some days I'd check, some days I wouldn't, but always I noticed whether someone else had. Michael's letters had never been long, but they came often. A rhythm, steady and comforting, like the hum of the fridge or the squeak of the screen door. Then 1 week passed, then 2. By the 3rd, Mom stopped putting extra rice in the pot, just enough for 3. No one said anything. Lisa noticed, though. She always did. "You think he ran out of paper?" she asked one day, half joking, but only half. "Maybe," I said, even though I knew better. Maybe the mail's slow. The truth was we'd all felt something shift in the house. In the way Dad stood still a little longer before turning on the TV. In the way Mom started folding the towels twice. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just 2 short taps on a Wednesday morning, like the sound itself was nervous. I was in my room, sketching something I didn't plan to finish, when I heard the door open then close. Silence, then footsteps. Then my mother's voice, low, not broken, just smaller. When I stepped out, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands in her lap, empty. Dad stood behind her, not touching her, but close. He looked like someone holding a chair that's about to tip. No one looked at me, and they didn't have to. I knew. There was no letter that day, just an envelope from the Department of the Army. A folded flag would come later. I don't remember the rest of that morning. Not clearly. I remember trying to open the fridge and not knowing why. I remember Lisa showing up and me not answering the door, though I saw her through the window. She stood there for a minute, holding something, probably those sour candy ropes she knew I liked, then left without knocking again. The thing about grief is, it doesn't crash in. It seeps, slow, like water under a door. That night, I took the radio to bed and turned it on, even though the signal was bad. Static hissed and popped like the sound of distant rain. I closed my eyes and imagined it was coming from the jungle where Michael had been. Not to scare me, just to say, still here, still something. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking up, the radio still on, the sound now so soft it might have been breathing. Chapter 6. The Winter Funeral. It snowed the morning we buried Michael. Not postcard snow, not soft or beautiful, just a thin, stubborn dusting, enough to make the roads slick, the sidewalks gritty, and the air sharp against your teeth. It was the kind of snow that felt personal. The funeral home smelled like lemon polish and the kind of old carpet that absorbs more memory than sound. A few trays of untouched sandwiches sat in a room no one wanted to sit in. The coffee tasted like metal. The chairs creaked. The clock ticked too loudly. People said the usual things. He was brave. He served with honor. He's at peace now. But no one said his name more than once. Michael. Mom wore the navy dress she used to keep for weddings. She added the silk scarf, folded tightly at her collar. She didn't cry, didn't even blink much. Just sat there like someone waiting out a storm they knew they couldn't stop. Dad stood behind her, hands clenched tight. His tie was crooked and he kept tugging at it like it might loosen something inside him. He flinched when people said things like, "Your loss," or "He did his duty," like the words were made of ice. I stood near the wall. Lisa was behind me. She didn't speak, just slipped her hand into mine and held it. And when the room got quiet, she leaned close and whispered one word. Sorry. Not dramatic, not shaky, just honest. One syllable that landed heavier than every speech before it. I've forgotten most of what people said at Michael's funeral. Their faces blur now, their voices already fading when they were speaking. But I remember Lisa's hand, and I remember her saying, sorry. Not sorry like you say when you bump into someone. Sorry like she wanted to carry the weight, just for a minute, so I could breathe. She couldn't fix anything. She didn't try. She just stood next to it. And maybe that's why it stayed with me. The rest of the service passed like fog. A bugle with a missed note. A folded flag handed off with both hands. A minister reading from a sheet, not the heart. I didn't hear a word, but I remember the cold, not on my face but in my chest, like something permanent had been scooped out, and nothing would quite fit the shape left behind. Afterward, we drove home in silence. Mom stared out the window like she didn't recognize the neighborhood anymore. Dad gripped the wheel hard. I think his knuckles were white the whole way. I went straight to my room and turned on the radio, hoping for anything that wasn't a prayer. Roy Orbison was playing, one of those voices that always felt too big for a small room. I lay down on top of the blankets, still in my dress shoes, and listened. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, because crying felt too clean for something this tangled. That night, I dreamed Michael was sitting on the edge of my bed. He looked the same, but his boots were muddy. He didn't say anything, just looked around the room, then at me, like he'd forgotten something important but didn't know how to ask for it. When I woke up, the radio was still playing. A preacher was talking about grace. I turned it off. The next morning, the snow was falling heavier, the kind that covers everything, even what you wish it wouldn't. At school, Miss Palmer stopped me in the hallway. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for your loss." She just looked at me and said, "Write it down, Danny. All of it. Write to remember, or it disappears." That afternoon, I opened the notebook I hadn't touched in weeks, the one I used to hide under my bed like it was dangerous. Page 1 was blank. So was page 2. But I started where I could, the way the snow looked like dust, the sound of coffee spoons against porcelain, the way Dad flinched when someone said, "duty," Lisa's hand in mine, and the one word she gave me, "sorry." That's how it began. Not with a story, but with a word. One someone else gave me, so I wouldn't lose it. A week after the funeral, Lisa handed me a folded piece of paper. She didn't say what it was, just pushed it across the porch railing and biked off. I didn't read it right away. It sat in my drawer under the old baseball cards and loose change until one cold night, when the house was too quiet again. I opened it slowly, like it might bleed. "Dear Michael, I know you'll never read this. That's not the point. Danny won't open the door. He saw me, though. I had those green apple candy ropes he likes, but I didn't leave them. It felt stupid, standing there with sugar in my hand while his world was falling apart. I don't know what you expected of war. I don't even know what you believed in. Maybe nothing. Maybe just loyalty. Maybe just silence, like your dad, or strength, like your mom. Or maybe you just didn't want Danny to be the only man in the house. Anyway, you're gone now, and he's still here. But he's not the same, and I'm scared I'll never know how to talk to him again. I told him, sorry. Just once. I hope it counted for something. You would have hated this letter. Too soft, too much feelings. I think you liked me better when I was sarcastic. I liked you better when you were still breathing. Lisa. I folded the letter back up and sat with it for a while. Didn't cry. Didn't smile either. Just let it be there, in my hands, like it had a weight it hadn't earned but needed to carry anyway. It was the first time I'd seen Lisa unsure of anything. She always had answers, always had fire in her. But this was her saying, "I don't know how to do this either." That helped more than any advice, more than any hug. Some things hurt more because no one says them out loud. Lisa said them, and now that they were on paper, folded and refolded and held in my hands, I could breathe again. Not better, not fully, but enough. Chapter 7. The Scarf and the Stove. After Michael died, Mom stopped humming in the kitchen. That was the first change I noticed. The silence wasn't new. Our house had always been the quiet kind. But it used to have a rhythm to it, the kind that wrapped itself around a song. Sometimes Motown, sometimes just a lullaby with no real words. Now, nothing. She still moved like she always had, measured, efficient, hands never idle. But something had been emptied out of her, not in a way you could point to, but like how a room feels different after someone moves the furniture, even if you can't tell what's missing. She cooked the same meals, but in smaller pots, stood a little closer to the stove like it might warm more than just her skin. One afternoon, when the house was especially still and the radio wasn't working, the batteries dead or dying, I wandered into the kitchen and found her staring into the oven like it owed her answers. She didn't look up when she spoke. Your brother used to steal potatoes from the drawer, said raw ones tasted better. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He only did it when I wasn't looking, but I always knew. She smiled then, faint and sideways, the kind of smile that comes with a sting. Later that week, I opened the hall closet to look for gloves and saw her scarf, the one she'd worn to Michael's funeral, hanging neatly on the same hook it had always hung on. But it looked different now, heavier, like it had absorbed everything she wouldn't say. That night, I sat at the kitchen table while she made tea. The kettle whistled too early, and she took it off the heat without saying anything. She set a cup in front of me like it was a quiet apology. "Did Michael ever write to you?" she asked. I nodded. "Not much, but enough." She sat down across from me and wrapped her hands around her own cup. "He didn't write to me. Not once." "I kept waiting," she said, almost to herself. "Every time the mail came." I didn't know what hurt more, that Michael hadn't written, or that she'd waited without ever asking if he had. We didn't say anything after that, just sat there, letting the tea go cold. The steam curled up between us like a secret. Looking back, I think that was the closest she ever came to crying in front of me. Not with tears, but with truth. She was a woman who kept things tightly folded. Her grief didn't shout. It steeped. Later that night, I wrote it all down. Not because I wanted to share it, not even to remember it exactly. I just didn't want to lose the sound of her voice when she said, "I always knew." Chapter 8. The Garage and the Old Wrench. The garage was never locked. It didn't need to be. No one in Maple Ridge stole tools, and even if they did, there wasn't much in there worth taking. Just a workbench, a rusted lawnmower, 2 shelves of jam jars filled with nails, and the smell of gasoline that had settled into the concrete like old sorrow. My father spent more time in that garage than he did in the living room. It was his kingdom of small, fixable things, hinges, sockets, oil filters, the kind of problems that came with instructions and could be solved with the right-sized wrench. The kind of problems that didn't talk back. When I was little, I used to sit on the stool next to the workbench and watch him work. He didn't say much, but when he did, it always came out clean, like he'd thought about it before the sentence even started. "Always put your tools back where you found them," he said once, not looking up. "It's not about neat, it's about knowing where things belong." That stuck with me, not just about tools. After Michael died, the garage got quieter. He still went in every day, still kept the bench clean, still turned on the old portable radio that only played AM stations, and sometimes just static. But he didn't fix anything, just sat there, like he was waiting for something to break. One Saturday afternoon, I wandered in. I hadn't been in there since the funeral. Dust had gathered in corners like unanswered questions. Dad was at the bench, staring at an open toolbox. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just nodded, then handed me something. A wrench, heavy, well-worn, cold to the touch. The same one Michael had used when he helped fix the screen door the summer before he left. "It's yours now," Dad said. That was all. Then he stood up and walked to the back of the garage, started reorganizing the jam jars without a word. I didn't know what to do with the wrench. I didn't have anything that needed fixing, but I held it anyway. Later that evening, I sat on the back steps with it in my hands, letting the weight of it settle into my palm, not heavy like burden, heavy like memory. Lisa came by and sat next to me without asking. After a while, she pointed to the wrench and said, "That your inheritance?" I almost laughed. I guess so. She leaned her head back and stared at the sky like it had answers. "Well," she said, "at least it's not a toaster." We sat there until the mosquitoes got brave and the porch light kicked on. She never asked why he gave it to me, and I didn't explain. Some things aren't gestures, they're acknowledgments. That night I set the wrench on my nightstand, next to the radio. I didn't turn the radio on. The wrench said enough. Chapter 9. The Man Who Stayed. I used to think my father was born old. There was something about the way he stood, straight-backed, arms crossed, always a little suspicious of anything newer than 1970, that made it hard to picture him as a boy, like he'd skipped childhood and gone straight to being someone who checks the oil and never loses the receipt. He wasn't cruel, just quiet and constant, like a barn beam, or a ticking clock you stop hearing after a while. When Michael left and then didn't come back, Dad got quieter and sharper. He still showed up, still mowed the lawn, still paid the bills, still flipped the bacon just right. But there was a tightness to him, a way he held himself like he didn't trust his own muscles anymore. I remember one morning I walked into the kitchen and found him staring out the window, holding a coffee mug he hadn't taken a sip from. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not sleepy, just worn at the edges. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I don't know what kind of man I'm supposed to be now." That stuck with me. He didn't say it like a question, more like a report, a quiet confession sent out into the morning light before he went back to pouring cereal. Miss Palmer once told us in class that boys spend their whole lives watching their fathers, even after they're gone. I didn't know what she meant back then. I do now. When I was 16, I found a photograph of my dad in the garage, shoved behind a box of light bulbs. He was young in it, 20 maybe, shirtless, greasy hands, grinning like someone had just told a dirty joke. He looked like a guy I'd want to know, someone with music in him, someone who might have danced in a garage when no one was watching. That picture changed something in me, not overnight, but slowly, like a stubborn knot loosening over time. I started seeing his silences not as distance, but as effort, like he was trying not to say the wrong thing in a world that kept changing the rules. Michael had once told me, in the kind of rare moment, he didn't try to be cool. Dad's a good man, just built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. At the time, I didn't understand. I do now. He was built for straight lines, for wrenches that fit, for truths that didn't move when you looked at them. And he'd lived long enough to see the world go soft around the edges, full of things that didn't stay fixed and didn't make sense. And instead of yelling about it, he just tried to hold still. That was his way of loving us, I think, by keeping still when everything else felt like it was coming apart. And maybe that's what being a man meant to him, not fixing everything, not knowing what to say, just staying upright while the house leaned, just being the one who didn't fall. I used to wish he'd say more. Now I'm just grateful he stayed. Chapter 10. The radio comes back to life. It had been weeks since the radio made a sound. The batteries had gone out sometime after the funeral, and I hadn't bothered to replace them. Part of me thought maybe it was better that way, like leaving it quiet was a way to respect the silence in the house. Or maybe I was just afraid to hear something that might remind me too much. But the silence had started to feel different, less sacred, more like a kind of mold. One afternoon, I found myself at McClellan's Hardware, standing in front of the battery rack, not even sure how I'd gotten there. I bought a pack of AAs and a roll of electrical tape, because that's what we always bought when Michael came with me. Back home, I opened the back of the radio and swapped the batteries. The little red light blinked. A soft crackle followed, static, the sound of nothing and everything at once. Then a voice broke through, just a local announcer talking about high school basketball scores, but it landed like music. I carried the radio to the kitchen and set it on the table. Mom didn't say anything, but I noticed her hand slowed while she stirred the soup. That night, I brought it to my room, set it back on the nightstand next to the wrench. Lisa had once said the thing looked like it had come from another century. She wasn't wrong. It was scratched. Half the tuning labels had rubbed off, and the antenna leaned to one side like an old man too polite to fall. Still, it worked. That was something. I laid back and let the static come and go. Sometimes it cleared enough to catch a song, always something old, like the radio knew what belonged here. And that's when it happened. Not a vision, not a ghost, just a memory so clear it felt like sound. Michael, summer before he left, sitting cross-legged on the porch with the radio between us. He was fiddling with the dial, trying to find a ball game, his face serious, like tuning the right frequency mattered more than anything. "You ever notice," he said, "how every station sounds like it's trying to come from somewhere just out of reach?" I didn't answer then. I think I just nodded. Now I knew what he meant. Everything good felt like that. Close but slightly out of range. You catch a note, a line, a glimpse, and then it fades again, like fog rolling back off the field. I sat up and turned the volume low. The room felt full, not crowded, just not empty anymore. I didn't hear Michael's voice. I didn't expect to. But I imagined him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, that half smile that meant he was watching, not judging. The kind of smile that didn't ask for anything, just stayed for a little while. Chapter 11. Things begin to settle. There wasn't a single moment when things got better. No switch flipped, no sunrise broke through the blinds and lit up the kitchen with clarity. What happened was smaller than that, slower. It was in the way Mom started humming again, not songs with words, just those gentle, breathy tunes she carried around like a second heart. She didn't even seem to notice she was doing it. That felt important. It was in the way Lisa started bringing books when she came over, sitting in the porch swing, reading out loud like I needed the sound more than the story. Sometimes she didn't even finish a page. Sometimes she just showed up and sat. I started writing again, not because I had something big to say. I didn't. But because the silence had gone stale. I wrote about the porch, about Michael's muddy boots, about the sound of soup being stirred and the weight of a wrench on my nightstand. I wrote until the pages stopped feeling blank and started feeling like memory. One day, I showed Lisa something I'd written. It was short, half a page, maybe less. I handed it to her without explaining. She read it without saying a word, then folded the page in half and tucked it in her back pocket like it was something worth keeping. "You're starting to sound like yourself again," she said. That caught me off guard. I wasn't sure I ever had a self that sounded like anything, but I let her believe it. At dinner, Dad passed the salt without needing to be asked. He even made a joke, something dry and crooked about the soup being almost edible. Mom didn't laugh exactly, but she didn't scowl either. That counted. The sky stayed gray for a while, but it stopped feeling heavy. Cold air came through the windows, and instead of bracing against it, we just put on sweaters. I started sleeping better. Not long or deep, but enough. One night, I dreamed of Michael again. This time, we weren't saying goodbye. We were just sitting on the roof of the garage, passing a bottle of root beer and trying to name constellations we didn't actually know. He was laughing. When I woke up, the sound of the radio filled the room. Some late-night show with a voice too slow to be in a hurry. I didn't write that dream down, but I kept it, and I think that counts too. Chapter 12. The letter that didn't ask for a reply. The post office was mostly empty, except for a woman weighing a box of canned peaches and a man arguing with the scale like it had insulted him. Lisa stood beside me, holding the envelope. It wasn't thick, just 2 folded pages and a Polaroid tucked inside. The photo was from the summer Michael fixed the screen door. His hand was blurry in motion, and his face was caught mid-laugh, like the camera had interrupted something private. Lisa had written the letter a week ago. She showed it to me, but didn't read it aloud. Said some things didn't need a second voice. Now she was mailing it to Michael's old army friend, a guy he used to write to but never brought around. She said he should know the kind of person Michael had been before the uniform. "I don't want to reply," she said. "I just don't want it to disappear." There wasn't much to say after that. We stepped outside into the pale sun. The air smelled like wood smoke and thawing earth. Maple Ridge in early spring, the kind of season that takes its time. We walked down the street toward nowhere in particular. Lisa kicked a stone and missed on purpose. I laughed, a real one this time, not polite, not practiced. "You gonna write more?" she asked. "I think so." "Good. It's starting to sound like you again." I didn't know I ever stopped. She looked at me sideways. "You didn't stop. You just got quiet." We passed the hardware store, and I remembered that day in the battery aisle. I hadn't thought much about it at the time, just a moment. But maybe moments were the whole thing. I think that's what writing is mostly. Not recording facts. Just choosing which moments to keep. That night I sat at the desk in my room, the radio playing something soft in the background. I pulled out the notebook and opened to a clean page. I didn't know where to start. So I wrote, "Dear Michael, this one isn't for memory. It's for now. And let the rest find its way." Chapter 13. The Things She Carried. When I was little, I used to think my mother's hands could do anything. They weren't soft, not even then. The skin was always a little dry, the nails kept short, the knuckles red from dishwater or winter. But they moved like they knew what mattered. Like they could mend anything with a needle, a spoon, or the flat of a palm. I remember once, when I had a fever and the whole room felt sideways, she sat on the edge of my bed and rested her hand on my forehead. Just her hand, no words. It felt like being tethered to something solid while everything else swayed. After Michael died, I stopped looking at her hands. It wasn't on purpose. I just couldn't. There was something too still about them, too folded. She kept them close to her lap or wrapped around a mug or hidden in sleeves. They weren't busy the way they used to be, and that scared me more than anything. One evening in late spring, I came into the kitchen and found her peeling potatoes with the radio on low. The window was open, and the smell of wet dirt drifted in with the sound of a lawnmower a few houses away. She didn't look up when I walked in, just kept peeling, slow and steady. "I used to do this with my eyes closed," she said, "back when you and Michael thought mashed potatoes came from the sky." I smiled. We did. She handed me a potato and the peeler. "Your turn." We peeled in silence for a while, passing the bowl back and forth. Then she said, "He used to hum when he helped, off key every time." She laughed a little, the kind that pulls something in the chest with it. I didn't say anything, just let her go on. I used to think I'd never forget what his voice sounded like, but sometimes now, I'm not so sure. That's the part no one warns you about. I nodded. My hands were shaking slightly, so I kept them busy with the peeling. "You don't have to remember everything," I said. She looked over at me, not sad, just wide open, like a door I hadn't noticed was unlocked. "I do," she said, "because I kept the parts no one else saw." Then she added, so quietly I almost missed it, "And I need someone to carry them when I'm gone." I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there with the potato still in my hand, her words echoing louder than the radio. "And I need someone to carry them when I'm gone." It wasn't the kind of sentence you answered. It just sat there in the room like the smell of something burning far away, not dangerous yet, but impossible to ignore. She turned back to peeling, like she hadn't said anything at all. I glanced at the scarf tied loosely at her neck, midnight blue. The color had faded some, but it still shimmered at the edges in a way cotton never could. "Why that scarf?" I asked. "You always wear it." She looked down, touched the fabric lightly, and let out a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Because it's mine," she said. "Not just something I own, something that knows me." She leaned back slightly, hands resting in her lap. Her eyes weren't on me, but on somewhere much farther. "It came from Hue, a city in central Vietnam. My aunt gave it to me for my wedding. Real silk from a little stall beside the Perfume River. She haggled with the vendor for 20 minutes, said the blue was special, like the sky right before it turns black. The night after the wedding," she went on, "there was a festival. We lit candles and placed them in paper lanterns. Then we sent them floating down the river, hundreds of them. It was so quiet you could hear the wax crackling, the water brushing against the banks, and someone singing far away. It's called the Lantern Floating Festival, Le Hoi Hua Dang," she said. "People float the lanterns to honor their ancestors, to send wishes down the river, or simply to let go of what still lingers in the heart. Each candle carries a thought of love or grief or hope. It's quiet but not empty. It feels like remembering out loud." She smiled softly. That night, Kahwe was sung on the Perfume River, melodies that matched the river's romantic beauty and lingered in the heart. Then she told me about the imperial music, Nyanyak, how it used to echo through the old citadel walls during royal ceremonies. She said she'd heard it once, outside the gate of the Dai Noi, when she was a girl, and it sounded like someone trying to hold time in their hands. She spoke of the Tien Mu Pagoda standing watch above the river bend, of rainy afternoons that smelled like sweet earth and roasted peanuts, of bicycles and saffron robes and school uniforms in rows. "I left when I was still young," she said, "but that place, it stitched itself into me, quietly, deeply." Her voice was almost a whisper now. "This scarf, it's not just a wedding gift. It's a piece of where I was born. It's seen what I've seen, felt what I've felt. It came with me across an ocean and stayed with me through every loss and beginning. I love it like I love my own breath." She touched it gently again, almost without realizing. And for once, I didn't feel the need to speak. I just sat there, listening. Not like a son, but like someone being handed something sacred. That night, I dreamed of Hue. I was standing by the riverbank, surrounded by paper lanterns glowing in the dark, their flickering reflections drifting over black water. The air was still, but full of waiting. A woman in Aoziai lit a candle and handed it to me without a word. When I placed it on the water, it joined 100 others, floating in slow procession toward the far side of the river. From across the water, I heard a voice begin to sing, low, echoing, like someone calling through time. It was a ho, I think, though I couldn't understand the words. I didn't need to. Then came the music, soft drums, delicate strings, the chime of bronze bells. It moved like silk through the air, solemn and unhurried. Behind it all, I saw shadows of an old citadel, lit with lanterns in gold and crimson. The sounds wrapped around it like a blessing, and in the dream, I stood perfectly still, not as a visitor, but as someone being remembered. Chapter 14. Lisa. Out loud. I was still in the dream, the river, the music, the hush of floating light, when I heard the screen door slam. Lisa's voice followed, somewhere between annoyed and amused, probably at her bike, or the cat, or herself. I didn't get mad. Something about her had changed since Michael died. She was still loud, still Lisa, but there were pauses now. Space between the jokes. That summer she started showing up more. Not like a rescue, not even a plan. More like gravity, quiet and constant. And for the first time I let her talk. She didn't burst into rooms or speak in monologues. She just stopped dodging the silences. And once she stopped, I started to realize how much she'd been holding back. She had this voice that didn't match her height or her usual sarcasm. It was low and careful, like a librarian reading you a secret. Sometimes, when we walked through the woods behind the neighborhood, she'd say something like, "You ever feel like nobody really knows what they're doing, and everyone's just faking it better than you?" Then she'd chuck a pine cone at a tree and move on like it didn't matter. But it did. I always remembered those things. She talked more about her dad, about the time he drove off for cigarettes and came back 6 years later with a beard and a baby, about how she hated his silence more than his absence, about the way her mom still looked out the window some nights, even when she thought Lisa wasn't watching. Once, sitting on the curb in front of my house, she told me she was afraid of turning into someone who apologized for existing. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just handed her half a cherry popsicle, and we sat there, letting it melt between our fingers. That summer, we went to the library a lot. She'd check out books with titles like Women Who Run with the Wolves and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. She said she wasn't looking for answers, just better questions. I never understood what that meant, but I liked the way she said it. Like maybe questions were enough. One time, in August, we climbed up to the old water tower and sat there for hours. The sun went down, and the stars came out, and she said, "I don't think grief ever really leaves. I think it just changes shape, like water in a jar." Then she nudged me with her foot and added, "You're the jar, by the way." I laughed. She smiled like she was proud of herself. Lisa wasn't trying to be wise. She just was sometimes, when no one was asking her to be. It made me want to listen more, to write things down, to remember, in case someone else ever needed the words and didn't know how to find them. Years later, when people ask me who helped me survive that time, I always say Lisa. Not because she fixed anything, but because she sat with me while it stayed broken. Chapter 15. The Room with No Door. Lisa's words lingered, like pebbles dropped in a still pond, their ripples tugging at the edges of my thoughts. She'd said grief changes shape, and as I lay in bed that night, her voice, low and careful, like a secret read aloud, seemed to carve out spaces in the dark, spaces I hadn't dared to enter. Some nights, those rooms opened on their own. You didn't knock. You just found yourself inside. That was one of them. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. It was sometime past 2 in the morning, and the house was quiet in that way it only gets when everyone else is really asleep. The kind of quiet that feels thick, alive almost. I laid there in bed with the fan whirring and the window cracked, letting in a breeze that smelled faintly of honeysuckle and cut grass. And then I remembered Michael. Not a thought exactly, more like a weight. The kind that settles just beneath your ribs and doesn't move. I got up, walked barefoot through the dark house, careful not to creak the boards near the hallway. I passed the room that used to be his. The door was closed. I didn't open it. I never did. Instead, I walked out to the porch. The night was warm, and the sky was soft with stars. Crickets buzzed low in the grass, and a train horn moaned far off, like someone calling out from another life. I sat down on the steps and closed my eyes. And then, I was there again. Not here, not the porch, somewhere else. A room I didn't recognize, though it felt familiar. It was dim and colorless, like a photograph left in the sun too long. There was a chair, a desk, a pile of books I used to own, but hadn't seen in years. Michael was there. He didn't say anything, just sat on the edge of the desk, tossing a baseball in his hand, back and forth, like he was waiting for me to start. "You mad at me?" I asked. He caught the ball, held it still. "That what you think this is about?" I shrugged. "I don't know what this is." He nodded like that made sense. Tossed the ball again. "You were supposed to stay," I said. He caught the ball. Looked right at me. "You were supposed to live," he said back. I opened my mouth to say something else, but the room shifted. Not violently, just gently, like the wind had moved through it. And then, he was gone. I woke up on the porch with a mosquito bite on my ankle and my shirt stuck to my back. The sky was just starting to pink. I sat there for a long time, thinking about how dreams give you just enough to miss them, and how grief, when it finally speaks, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits in a chair across from you and waits for you to understand. Chapter 16. A Better Kind of Lost. That summer, after the dream, after the porch, I started walking more. Not to get anywhere, just to be moving. The streets weren't different, really. Same cracked sidewalks, same barking dogs behind the same fences. But I noticed things more. Or maybe just noticed that I noticed. A weather vane I'd never looked at. The way the light hit the mailboxes at dusk. An old man who always seemed to be watering a patch of dirt that never grew anything. Sometimes Lisa walked with me. Sometimes she didn't. Either way, she understood the kind of quiet I needed. The kind that wasn't empty. One afternoon, we found ourselves at the little baseball field near the school. It was overgrown and forgotten. The dugout roof had caved in, and someone had tagged a heart on the backstop. Tell the truth, even if your voice shakes. Lisa read it, then looked at me sideways. Ever done that? Told the truth even when you knew it would ruin everything? I said, I think sometimes you don't know it's the truth until it ruins something. She didn't laugh, but she didn't walk away either. She just nodded and sat down on the edge of the pitcher's mound, pulling at the grass. We didn't talk much that day, just sat with the bugs and the dust and the sound of something far off getting closer, then passing by. A plane, maybe, or thunder, or time. Later that week, Dad fixed the screen door. Didn't say anything about it, just did it. The new hinges didn't squeak. I missed the squeak. I missed the sound of Mom humming when she peeled potatoes, too. And Michael's boots thudding down the hallway, and the way Lisa used to mock everything we read in English class. But I also started keeping a notebook. I wrote down things people said, things I overheard, things I thought but couldn't say out loud. I didn't know what I was doing exactly, only that it felt like stacking stones somewhere, so later I could look back and say, yes, I was here. I wasn't healed, not even close, but I was moving. And sometimes, even lost feels better than stuck. Chapter 17. What We Brought With Us. It was Lisa's idea to get out of town. Just a day, she said. We can tell our parents it's a school thing, field trip or something. She had a map folded in her glove compartment and a cooler full of peach Snapple and peanut butter sandwiches. I brought a notebook, half full now, and a disposable camera I found in Michael's old desk drawer. Still had 4 shots left. We drove for a while without music, the windows down, the air heavy with pine and sunburnt fields. Lisa kept her feet on the dash and hummed under her breath, like the hum was more for her than for anyone else. We didn't have a destination. That was the point. Just a road, a sky, and the space to not be anyone for a while. Eventually, we ended up at a lake neither of us had been to. The water was brown and quiet. A family was fishing off the dock. Someone's dog barked at a heron and then sat down like it regretted the effort. We didn't swim, just lay on the grass near the shore, the sun moving slow overhead. You think it's weird, Lisa said, that I feel lighter when we're farther from home? No, I said. I think it makes sense. She pulled a blade of grass apart, piece by piece. I don't know what I'm going to do next year, she said. Like, not just school, but with everything. I didn't say anything. I didn't have an answer, and she wasn't really asking. A few hours later, we drove home. We didn't talk much, but it wasn't a bad kind of quiet. It was the kind that fills up a car and makes it feel like you've left something behind without losing it. When I got home, I took the last 4 pictures on the camera. My front porch, the cracked sidewalk out front, the window in the kitchen that caught afternoon light, and one of the living room chair where Dad always left his newspaper folded in half. I wasn't sure why I took them, only that I wanted to, like writing in the notebook, like walking, like remembering something before it disappears. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I wrote down a list. Not of what I wanted, not yet, just what I had. A camera, a porch, a friend, a few good questions, a little space. It didn't feel like much, but it was something. Chapter 18. The Ride Back. It was late August when I pulled Michael's old bike from the shed. The tires were flat. The chain had rusted in 2 places, but it still had the little brass bell he'd taped on years ago, even though he'd never actually used it. I tightened what I could, filled the tires at the gas station, and started riding again. It was too small for me now, my knees high and awkward, but that felt fitting. Everything that summer felt a little too small. Or maybe I'd just gotten bigger in ways I hadn't noticed. I didn't go far, just the old loop around the school and back, past the library, the baseball field, the creek that dried up by July. Sometimes I imagine Michael riding ahead of me, kicking gravel, yelling back that I was too slow. I'd yell something dumb back, just to keep him there a little longer. One time, I passed Miss Palmer's house, and she waved from her porch. I stopped, leaned on the handlebars. "You look like you're thinking about something serious," she said. "I guess I am," I told her. She smiled. "That's what growing up feels like you're always walking around with a puzzle piece in your hand, and you're not sure which part of the picture it belongs to." I didn't know what to say to that, but I wrote it down when I got home. That night, I sat on the porch with Mom. The crickets were loud, the breeze warm. She said, "You've been quieter lately, in a different way." I said, "I think I've been listening more." She nodded, then looked out into the yard like she was watching something invisible move through the trees. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said. "Not for being strong, just for staying soft." I didn't say anything, just kept rocking in the chair, the rhythm easy and slow. Sometimes, staying soft is the hardest thing there is. That night, I dreamed of nothing, and when I woke up, I felt rested. Chapter 19. The Turn. By mid-September, the cicadas were quiet and the air had started to bite. You could smell school supplies in the stores again, pencil shavings and notebook glue. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but the light had, softer somehow, more sideways. Lisa wore her jacket even when it wasn't cold. Said it helped her feel like she was already somewhere else. I didn't mind the shift. Summer had stretched long and strange, like a note held too long in a song. I was ready for a new key. At night, the porch got darker earlier. The fan stopped being enough. Mom started making soup again. Dad's newspaper got thinner, like the world was slowing down. One Saturday morning, I cleaned out Michael's desk. Not because anyone told me to, just because I wanted to know what was left. There wasn't much. A baseball glove, stiff with age, a pencil tin, a note from a girl I didn't recognize, a matchbook from a place called The Lantern, a folded paper star. I didn't throw anything away, just moved it from one box to another, labeled it Michael, taped it shut, put it under my bed. When I came back into the kitchen, Mom didn't ask what I'd been doing. She just handed me a mug of tea and kept chopping carrots. Later that day, Lisa stopped by. She didn't knock, just walked in like always. We didn't go anywhere, just sat on the floor in my room, backs against the bed. She said, "I think I want to leave this town someday, not because I hate it, just because I need to know what it feels like to look back." I didn't say anything, but I knew exactly what she meant. That night, I added to the list a jacket, a matchbook, a paper star, a friend who didn't knock. The air was cooler now, the dark came sooner, and even though nothing had changed in the house, everything felt like it was turning. Turning toward what? I didn't know, but I was starting to lean with it. Chapter 20. Light in October. October came in soft, not a single cold snap, just a slow settling. Even the wind changed its mind less often. The trees finally gave in, one leaf at a time, like they were trying not to wake anyone. By then, I'd gotten used to the silence between things, between words, between days. It wasn't empty, just wide, like a field with no fence. Sometimes Lisa and I walked without talking, not out of sadness, just habit, like our thoughts knew how to travel beside each other without help. One afternoon, she handed me a folded note. No envelope, no explanation. It said, "If you ever write something about this summer, make sure it's not just about grief. Make it about light, too." That evening, the sun caught in the kitchen window in a way that made the dust glow. I watched Mom pour tea and thought about how many quiet miracles I'd missed just by looking for the loud ones. Later that night, I opened the box I'd packed from Michael's desk. I took out the matchbook, held it for a while, then struck one. It flared, bright and fast, gone before I could blink. But in that flicker, I saw his face. Not the one from the end, but the one from the bike rides, the treehouse, the time he dared me to jump the creek and caught me when I didn't quite make it. I let the match burn down to my fingers before dropping it in the sink. Not because I was being dramatic, just because I wasn't afraid of holding it. And maybe that was something too. Chapter 21. First Frost. The first frost came overnight, quiet and unapologetic. I saw it in the morning, a film of white on the grass, glittering like someone had dusted the world in sugar. It made everything look still, like time had paused to hold its breath. Dad brought the plants in. Mom wrapped the porch swing in an old quilt. I watched from the window, wondering how things could keep changing without ever announcing themselves. That day at school, Lisa said, "I think we made it." I asked, "Made it through what?" She shrugged. "Just made it. That's enough, isn't it?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. In English class, Miss Palmer gave us a blank sheet of paper. "Write about anything," she said, "but try to tell the truth." I stared at the page for a long time. Then I wrote about a creek that dries up by July, a porch that gets quieter every night, a summer that didn't end with fireworks but with a jacket and a list. I wrote about silence, about what stays after someone leaves, about the kinds of love that don't get named until long after they've done their work. When I handed it in, Miss Palmer didn't say anything. She just smiled and tapped the paper twice with her fingers, like it meant something only I would understand. That night, I walked out into the yard. The frost had come back again, this time thicker. My breath puffed out in clouds. I stood there a while, not waiting for anything, just there. And that, for once, felt like enough. Chapter 22. The Cassette Box. In early November, Mom found a box in the back of the hall closet. It was labeled Danny's Stuff, though I had no memory of putting it there. Inside were old cassettes, the kind you'd get in cereal boxes, or record off the radio if you timed it right. One had Michael's Mix scrawled across it in blue marker. We didn't have a cassette player anymore, but Miss Palmer did. She kept one in her classroom, tucked behind the supply cabinet with the globe and the slide projector. When I brought it to her, she smiled like it was a time capsule. "Haven't used this in years," she said, dusting it off. We sat on the floor while it whirred to life, static at first, then a song I didn't recognize, a raspy voice, low and full of ache, then another, some band Michael liked, probably before he thought liking things too much wasn't cool. One track faded into the next. It wasn't a playlist, it was a memory map. Miss Palmer sat cross-legged beside me, grading papers, letting the music fill the corners. "Funny thing about mixtapes," she said. "They don't just tell you what someone liked, they tell you who they were trying to be." I didn't answer, just watched the tape spin, the reels turning like clock hands that only went backward. When it ended, I rewound it, played it again. This time, I wrote down the lyrics I could catch, words that felt like they belonged to something I hadn't understood until just then. Later that night, I copied them into my notebook. Then I added my own. Not a song, not yet, just lines. but they felt like a beginning, and that felt like enough.
Chapter 23.
When the year turned. New Year's Eve came with little fanfare. No snow, no fireworks, just a drizzle that turned to fog, curling around streetlights like breath. Mom made soup. Dad fell asleep before 10. Lisa came over with a deck of cards and a sleeve of Oreos. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't bother counting down. "I don't really believe in resolutions," she said, dealing the cards. "Me neither," I said. "Feels like daring yourself to break a promise." But we made one anyway. Just one. To write things down when they mattered. Even the small things, especially the small things. At midnight, we didn't cheer. Just listened to the rain ticking on the roof and the clock humming into another year. Lisa left a little after 1. She didn't hug me, just tapped the table twice, the same way Miss Palmer had. I stayed up, flipping through my notebook. So many little pieces. A song lyric, a drawing of the treehouse, a half sentence I never finished, a sketch of Michael's shoes, a line Mom once said in the dark. Some days you don't fix anything, you just hold it. It didn't feel like closure, just another kind of beginning. And maybe I didn't need anything louder than that. Chapter 24. What stayed. Winter came all the way in by February. The kind of cold that didn't just nip your fingers. It stayed in your sleeves, under your collar, behind your knees. We were deep into the quiet months. School felt like a long tunnel with no turn. Even the trees looked tired. But something about the stillness made me notice things I used to miss. The way Dad refilled the salt shaker without being asked. The way Mom folded dish towels with the stitched corner always facing out. The way Lisa started pausing before answering questions, like she'd learned not every silence needed filling. I kept writing, sometimes just one line, sometimes a whole page, sometimes nothing, but I'd open the notebook anyway, just to remind myself that the story was still going. One afternoon, I walked to the treehouse. It was sagging a little, but still there. A nail had popped out of the railing. I pushed it back with my thumb. From up there, the backyard looked smaller than I remembered. The woods behind it, thinner. Like even the trees had stepped back a little, made room for us to grow. I didn't stay long, just enough to take a breath and leave it with the wind. That night, I found Mom sitting at the table with a cup of tea and her sewing box open. She didn't look up. "I think it's time to put the scarf away," she said. I didn't say anything. She folded it gently, like something still breathing, and laid it in a drawer lined with soft paper. No ceremony, no sadness, just the quiet act of making space.
Chapter 25.
The river keeps the words. In March, the creek started to run again. It wasn't much, just a trickle threading through last year's leaves. But I stood and watched it anyway, boots sinking into soft mud, the air smelling faintly of rain and thaw. I remembered the summer I jumped and didn't quite make it. Michael's hand grabbing mine midair, the splash, the laughter. I wondered where that water had gone, if it reached a river, if it ever touched the ocean, if it still carried any sound of us, laughing, yelling, living. By then, Lisa had started keeping her own notebook. She didn't show it to me, but I saw her writing at lunch, in the library, under the bleachers during gym. "Yours helped me start," she said once. "Start what?" She just smiled. Something that listens back. On the last day of March, I tore a page from mine. Not one of the heavy ones, not the grief or the big questions. Just a small thing. A list of things I wanted to remember. A pine cone, a porch, the sound of say hui, Michael's bell on the bike. I folded it, walked to the creek and let it go. The paper floated for a few seconds, then dipped and swirled, caught in a current too small to see unless you were really looking. Maybe it wouldn't go far, but maybe far wasn't the point. Maybe letting go, gently, deliberately, was its own kind of distance. And maybe the river kept the words, even when I couldn't. Chapter 26. Last Light. In late April, the days grew longer again. Not by much, just enough to notice. Light stayed on the porch a little later. The trees budded slowly, cautiously. The creek moved clearer now, not loud, but sure. One evening, I sat on the back steps while Dad fixed something under the hood of the car. The radio was on low, some old soul song crackling through the static. He hummed along without knowing the words. After a while, he said, "You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Most days." He nodded, didn't press. That was enough. A few days later, Miss Palmer gave us one last assignment. Write a letter to your future self. I stared at the blank page, then wrote, "I hope you remember. Not just the big stuff, the small things, the pine cones, the porches, the paper stars, the friends who knocked, the ones who didn't, the days that didn't need fixing." Then I sealed it, wrote my name on the front, and tucked it into the envelope pile on her desk. Lisa and I didn't talk about goodbyes. We just made plans to meet at the library over the summer. Left it at that. The morning of the last day of school, I rode Michael's bike one more time, knees still too high, the bell still loose. I passed the field, the creek, the corner where he used to wait for me. And as I coasted down the last hill, I let go of the handlebars, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the wind hold me up. And then I held on again, and kept going.
It's not about what was lost, but what stayed. The memories, the silences, the quiet gestures, the fragments of love that never had a name. All of them remain in the quietest way. Thank you for listening to What Stayed. If this story touched something in you, a quiet memory, a gentle ache, or something you're still holding on to, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a story like this. Sometimes the smallest things are what stay the longest. See you in the next story.